sports has a power to change communities. No one's ever done this in North America and made it sustainable. It took a lot of long nights and just gut wrenching conversations.
Welcome back, investor. We have another episode of Passive Income Adventures. I'm Emma Powell. If you're new, this is your first time here. It's a podcast where we talk about changing your life, all things business, investing, personal finance. My guest today is Kimball Kjar. Kimball, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate you dropping in to give us your perspective on life and business and all things sports investing. And I think your story is really interesting since we first met a few years back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I understand my story might be a little bit different from some of the other folks that you've had on your show, but have appreciated your journey with us along the way, and happy to jump on here and tell a little bit more of the stories of the Utah Warriors, but more importantly, just how unique and maybe some synergistic ideas of investment, real estate, all sorts of stuff. Cause it's actually a very similar type of investment strategy when you're looking at professional sports and how it's a long play, not just a cash flowing opportunity. But anyways, we can dig into all of that, but
Yeah.
no, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing we really focus on this show is investing in private markets. I'm of the opinion on public markets that I can't beat the market. Like I don't even try. So I just play the index. But I feel like in private markets, I have a lot more control over where I'm investing and what kind of returns I can expect. And like you said, do I need cash flow? Is it more long term, short term? I just have a lot more freedom over being able to choose. So one of the things that I really like about the show is we just open up all the alternatives, basically private market investing. And the Utah Warriors is one of the first private investments that I ever did. Not the first, but it was definitely very early on. And it was something that I just wanted to invest in because I just liked what you guys were building. So, can you tell me a little bit more about the history of the Utah Warriors and your personal history kind of leading up to that? Because I know you played for the US national team for a couple of years and what, 6, 7 years,
Yeah.
2001 to 2006. So 5 years, and then also scrum half. So that's one of the, if you know what a scrum half is.
Yeah, most people, when I tell them that I play scrum half that are in the know, they look at me and say, "Really? Or did you play on the front row with the props?" But
Yeah.
you know, let's just say that it was many years ago and many pounds ago.
A
Um,
lot of us get out of shape and get called props. So it's okay.
yeah,
It's part of aging.
yeah. The short end of the story with the Warriors has been an interesting one. It's one that I didn't candidly really choose to go into, if I'm being completely honest with you. I was brought in by a group of four individuals at the time. This is back in about 2015. Rugby was in the works of becoming professionalized,
Mhm.
a number of other different avenues and some other folks. And we wanted to make sure that Utah had an opportunity to be involved in those discussions. And I was actually brought in at the time as like the rugby head.
Okay.
I was running and managing and partnered with a gentleman doing some executive search and some other recruitment businesses and some things at the time. We'd done some real estate investments as well. So we'd done a number of different things, but I was brought in more on just you handle the rugby. I was also coaching at the time with BYU rugby. I was a former BYU player, played with the U.S. national team, like you noted. But yeah, I was just brought in to help with the rugby stuff. Long story short, that group evolved and materialized into something different. And I was left, for good or for bad, as saying, listen, if this is going to work for Utah, I've got to be the one to step in and take the, the bull by the horn, so to speak. And listen, we ended up mustering things in some of those early years. And you were around in some of those early years, Emma, when we were candidly, we didn't know if we were going to make payroll, if we didn't know how we were going to fledgling sports and entertainment property off the ground. Challenger sports to begin with are hard, but let alone sport rugby in the most competitive sports and entertainment market in the world, which
Mhm.
the US. And candidly, I don't know if I had known now how difficult and hard it was going
Yeah.
to probably would have been something that I would have at least thought twice about, because what that ended up doing is I was funding things out of my own personal finances. I was getting loans from family members. One of the more unique stories is a personal one to me where my parents actually saw what I was doing and they pulled me aside one day. And I was like, I've got this decision point of whether or not we continue on or we shut the doors. And my parents came to me and said, how much do you need? And I said, we're looking at a pretty substantive amount of money to keep the lights on. We're talking a pretty healthy sum here. And my parents mortgaged their house
Wow.
to loan us the money. to be able to keep this thing going. And it took a lot of long nights and just gut wrenching conversations that you thought you'd never have, not only with your spouse, but with your parents and friends, family members, and people saying you shouldn't be doing this. That's probably one of the craziest things that you could possibly do. And at the time, I didn't necessarily disagree with them, but I believed in what we were trying to do and the good that sport can have, specifically rugby can have within a community. And so I believed that something was going to come of it. That was 2018, 2019. And we just, I call them the peanut butter and jelly years because we didn't have a lot of money to pay for nice things, specifically food and other things for the players. So a lot of the times when players were on the road, the best that we could offer them was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And we were doing just the best that we could.
We went to that first match in San Diego, and they were having the dinner afterwards, and we were joking, like, we paid for the dinner. It was like, it wasn't anything fancy, but we were able to fly the team out there, get them in a hotel in that first match, and then pay for the dinner. And I was like, that's probably what I invested right there. Like, just one day, right?
Yeah, it was an interesting year, first year or two. The league really caught fire though early on, and then COVID hit, and that just reset everything back to square one. Fortunately for us, we were able to bring on an investor and owner that is now the majority owner of the team. He likes to remain private, so I won't disclose his name at the moment, but his family office is called the Tamarack Fund,
Okay.
based out of Kalispell, Montana. He lives up in Park City, Utah, but he's an amazing gentleman and is passionate about what we're doing with the Warriors, chooses to be very private about his investment. We don't have the sort of Ryan Smith celebrity ownership type ethos with him and his family. He came on in late 2019, in December of 2019, and he's been a mainstay to make sure that we're able to have the financial wherewithal as an organization. So ever since then, we've just continued to try to steadily grow. And I think that's culminated fast forwarding to just last year in May of 2024. We just opened up our brand new 15,000 square foot Warriors HQ is what we call it. It's got 10,000 square feet of a gym, medical, locker rooms, meeting space, for the players. In fact, they're out just having a meeting right now. Hopefully it's not too noisy so you can't hear them in the background, but we've also got about 4,000 square feet of office space for the staff. And we've gone effectively from one full-time staff member, myself, to full-time staff of about 25 people. The league has grown from 7 teams to 11 teams. We just announced a deal with ESPN to broadcast all of our stuff on ESPN, ESPN2, and ESPN Plus. What was essentially a fool's errand early on, at least perceptively to many, has now become something I think of substance and value. And we're really starting to see some interesting opportunities in front of us. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride, but let me ask you this question. This is a question I've battled with my entire rugby career. Right? My high school coach was trying to build a rugby program, and he was the football coach and state championship football. Like, we won every year. It was a good program. And we're like, why rugby? Why don't you just focus on this amazing football team? And he was like, we want to build rugby as a sport in the United States. I like playing rugby. I thought it was, but I just never really caught on to the vision of why it was so important in a community and why this in particular. As the years went by, I was involved very early days of the Austin team, watching their peanut butter and jelly. Are they going to make payroll? I don't know. My husband be like, have you got paid yet? I'm like, I don't know. It's a startup. We don't know how this is going to go. And I found myself asking again, especially when I'm at a match, watching these athletes get just beat up for rugby. So why is it so important to build the sport? Why is it so important to make the sacrifices that you've talked about, or the physical sacrifices that the athletes made, or the time commitment? Watch the same thing with my kids' team in Texas, where the coach there was trying to build a women's team to compete with the Austin Valkyries. And I was like, why are we so passionate about building this? I was just as passionate about building it and involved, but I never really got, other than just, I just like it. So you tell me about that.
I'll take a step back, not just on rugby or the Warriors specifically, but I'll say sport in general.
Mhm.
I'm going to use the story of someone else to illustrate this. So Dean Howes, who you
Mhm.
may recall was the first commissioner of Major League Rugby. He's been a mentor of mine. He was involved with Real Salt Lake in the early days in Major League Soccer. Him and Dave Checketts and their group also owned the St. Louis Blues and some other sports. He was a part of a lot of that early days stuff. I remember him telling me a story one time. He says, listen, the power of sports and sports brands is something that can be understated or overstated enough because of what they can do for communities and individuals. And he went on to tell this story of when he was in Salt Lake. He was here during the early days of Real Salt Lake, and then he was called on an LDS mission as a mission president for 3 years. And so he divested himself from Real Salt Lake, was gone for 3 years, and then he came back and he was at a restaurant, and the waitress who was pouring his water, she'd pouring it, and then he noticed on her arm some he called it some proprietary font. It was the RSL logo. And then on the other arm, it was the actual Real logo as well. So she had put the actual kind of primary logo on one arm and then the script logo, the secondary logo on her other arm, and tattooed that on her arm. And so he's think about that in that case. This girl decided to go to somebody and pay money to go through the physical pain of getting a tattoo on both of her arms because she was so passionate and committed to that brand that she felt the need to connect with it on that level. And you compare that. I don't know if you talk a little bit more locally with some of the sports teams here. I don't know of too many people, like, for example, that have a Qualtrics logo.
No,
Well, as opposed to a Utah Jazz logo, right? Ryan
true.
Smith. Well, maybe Ryan Smith has a Qualtrics logo.
Maybe, but
Maybe
nobody else does.
too many people have tattoos of Qualtrics or Apple or McDonald's. Fill in the blank. There's strong brands like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, those types of companies. There's some strong brand affinity, but sports is something emotional. It's something visceral. It elicits a reaction. It's why the Super Bowl, it's why live sports continues to be the most primarily watched live TV event, not only in the US, but around the world. That's why advertisers and sponsors are leaning on sports to be able to connect to consumers in powerful ways. So sports in general does something unique for community. It creates identity. You look at the recent Super Bowl, it was the city of Philadelphia and the personality of Philadelphia and the grit and the hard work, the blue collarness of Philadelphia versus Kansas City and this Midwestern dynasty that they were trying to build. And it elicited all of these emotions from the people that were a part of those communities. But you can even talk about that a little bit more locally here in Utah. You've got the BYU and the Utah stuff.
Okay.
Utah, the red versus the blue, and the holy war of the football teams. And it divides lines, but it also unites people in a lot of ways. When I was looking at how deep do I dive into this, I began to look at and really fundamentally realize that sports has a power to change communities, I believe, more so than just about any other business. It takes a whole lot of money to do it. And in fact, the whole financial analysis of a sports entertainment business is completely upside down from other businesses. So you got to look at it through a very different lens. But the impact that a sports entertainment property can have on a community is something that's truly powerful. And then to step into the rugby level, though, rugby is a sport that has given me so much. I was able to meet my wife through my rugby teammates and friends. I was able to travel the world through rugby. I was able to learn and do so many things through rugby. Most of my professional contacts started out through rugby and the people that I met down at BYU and other universities. And it's given me so much. And rugby has this, you can go anywhere in the world and rock up to a rugby club and say, hey, I'm a rugby man. I'm a former scrum half. And again, have them look at you like, wait, you're a prop. All joking aside, you can have this connection with people because of the sport itself, and it teaches respect. You don't see guys flopping like you do in certain other
Yeah.
sports that have a round ball, but you'll see a respect for the referee and kind of this, it was Winston Churchill said, it's a game of hooligans played by gentlemen. So for me, rugby's kind of had an inner quality that I believe our communities need today, especially the young kids in our communities, a sense of value, a sense of identity and self and respect and all that sort of stuff that I believe is important, especially in today's world. So for me, that's the crux of why I find value in it, not only just in what sports can do, but how rugby can impact individual life as well.
Yeah, I got into karate after high school, and I remember thinking was a bunch of little kids, right? And they were constantly talking about respect, self-discipline. And I remember as an adult standing there thinking, I feel like all of this I learned on the rugby pitch. Like you go out after the game and have dinner with the other team. There was something about rugby culture that was just so much different than any other sport and spoke to me in martial arts a little bit, how they do that. But I don't see a lot of that same sportsmanship and respect in other sports. Maybe that's one of the reasons I like it. But let's expand on that into the business of sports in general, but also the business of rugby. You mentioned that the financials are tossed on their head, and you also mentioned the challenges not only of building a sports organization in the US, basically the biggest sports market in the world, and the specifics of rugby culture. Like rugby's a huge sport internationally, but we have some big challenges bringing that to the United States. So tell me about the business of sports, because when I see that, I think all the families that are being supported by this business. So ticket sales is supporting athletes, merch sales, it's got marketing people. Like that's what paid me when I was working in the industry. And so I think the business of sports is one of the things that I latched onto as why this. Somebody has to pay the bills of these families who work for these organizations. And that actually got me fired up. So tell me about the business, that why is it different and what are the challenges in the US specifically?
Just speaking, coming back to one of the things you said there, like rugby is, depending on your perspective, it's second or third largest sport in the world.
Mm.
Soccer is obviously the biggest. Cricket is another large international sport, but rugby, as I would say, is the most likely international sport to make a strong commercial viability in the North American market.
Agree.
And so I think just the physicality, the hand-eye coordination, the aerial skills, there's a lot of everything that Americans like with sport, with American football or football, and then soccer with the constant action, MMA with the combat sports stuff, as well as basketball with kind of the hand-eye coordination, spatial awareness, that kind of thing. So there's a lot that they readily recognize. As I've said before in other conversations and podcasts, 99% of the time people come to our games and they typically say, "Oh, I didn't really know what was going on,
Yeah,
but I
but it
love."
was great.
Okay. So it's just getting people sticky and familiar with that. And
Yeah.
we're seeing some of that. So that kind of leads into the how do you grow a challenger sport and the business side of this that becomes the important question. And I'll say this, I think just overall, what we've noticed is that you really have to do, there's been a lot of trial and there's been a lot of, no one's ever done this in North America and made it sustainable. In fact, there was a professional league. I don't know if you can hear all the cheering in the background. I
I think
apologize.
it's part of sports. I can hear it, but you know what? Maybe the editor can take it out. I don't know. But if he can't, it's what this
It-
show is about. Exactly what they're doing right now.
It's a team meeting. I'm in one of the conference rooms, but they're literally probably 100 feet away and doing some stuff. So forgive the background noise.
I love all that atmosphere that
So hopefully it doesn't distract myself or other people
yeah.
listening. But the point is that when we had to take a look at this, it's okay. Rugby internationally, it's the sport where it's entrenched in the culture. It's more about beer and drinking and socializing and going to a game and sitting and being respectful. And there's not a lot of craziness or American sports chaos, as it were, that you might see with all the NBA games and the NFL games, dare I say the pomp and circumstance, right? So we've had to balance all of that with like how much pomp and circumstance and the trappings of American sports in order to help the non-rugby person feel like they're at a professional sports game environment, but not completely alienate the rugby purist that just
Mhm.
wants to go and have a beer and doesn't want to have the PA announcer speaking to them about what the rules of rugby are,
Yeah.
and sometimes get the rules wrong, which
You're talking about stuff like halftime shows, and I remember we showed up to a match one time and there were I think it was cowbells or maybe it was those plastic things you hit together at basketball games. And I remember you saying something like, "We're just gonna make the rugby purists mad, but you got to appeal to the US sports market." And I remember thinking like, "I like cowbells. This makes this more fun." So,
yeah, we had, in fact, you'll notice that none of our games now we have we don't have cowbells, but that just tells you something. Like we tried that, it didn't work. We've tried some other things, they didn't work, and so there's been this evolution of figuring out. Now, coming back to the like the actual business of it, just a high level strategy. Sports and entertainment properties, even NBA, most NBA and some NFL. NFL is just printing money because it's a completely different animal. But
yeah.
like most sports entertainment properties, NHL, MLS, I'd say the majority of the NBA and some of the NFL teams, they're not making money. They, whatever you make, you end up putting it back into the business, or you operate at a loss with the assumption that your asset value is going to appreciate over time. So that's where you get a lot of the similarities in sports entertainment and real estate as to how you, because it's probably the most correlative comparison I would say is that you're going to buy an underlying asset. You're going
Mhm.
to try to make sure that it sustains itself through rental income, other things to be able to make it sustainable. You obviously don't want to be pouring tons of money into that property in order to flip your ROI or IRR on what you're trying to do. Same thing with sports. I'll just give a very specific example. Like right now, I read an article this morning on one of the news sites that commented on the value of the Utah Jazz. About 4 years ago, Ryan Smith bought the Jazz from the Miller family for about $1.7 billion. Right now, it was estimated in this article that he could turn around and sell the Utah Jazz for about 3.75 billion. So you do the math, like that's a pretty decent return in just 4 years.
Yeah.
Care who you are. That's a pretty decent return in 4 years.
Yeah.
But what he's had to do in order to help grow the value of the organization to get it to that level is that he's had to write the checks and keep
Mhm.
expanding and developing the business in order to make it sustainable and scalable for the rest of the organization, from new marketing people, expansions within the stadium and the arena that they have, as well as some of these other things that they're doing. So that's a hyper local specific example, but it gives you an idea that, like, for example, I was also reading an article recently, the Chicago Bears, they're the longest owned single family owned sports and entertainment property. I think they bought the team for $500 back in 1903 or something.
I did not
And
know that. That's
it's
interesting.
now worth close to $5 or $6 billion, right?
Yeah.
But over the years, those sports and entertainment properties have had to have someone that has carried the financial torch, so to speak, to be able to sustain the business. So when you're looking at it through the lens of, okay, these are established sports and entertainment products like an NBA and NFL, or even an NHL and Major League Baseball, the core four of here in the US, you start looking at, okay, what about the MLS? That's probably the next best comparison to the MLR. People forget that a little over 20 years ago, people didn't know if the MLS was going to make it. In fact, they were pretty close to just turning off the
Yeah.
lights.
Yeah.
But in 20 years, they've gone from an expansion fee for Real Salt Lake, which was about $15 million at the time, 7.5 million expansion fee, and then a 7.5 million investment into Soccer United March. So 15 million overall. So now San Diego FC just came into they're the most recent expansion team to an expansion fee of 500 million. So you can see that as long as the league and the investment into a team are consistent, meaning that people understand that the strength of your investment in a team as an underlying asset is only as strong as the value perceived of the league, then sports and entertainment is going to be sustainable. For a challenger sport like rugby, a challenger business like this in what is arguably the most competitive sports entertainment market in the world, but also the most lucrative sports entertainment market in the world, you've got to have people that have the financial disposition to be able to, dare I say, take it on the chin for the early years to be able to realize the ROI on the back end. And it's going to take time, and it's going to
Yeah.
take a lot of money, and it's going to take people that are willing to commit to that brand development and look at it through a 10 to 20-year lens, because anything shorter than that, these businesses have a very hard time, just even in general, making money, as I stated earlier. But when you're a challenger sport and you're trying to carve out an existence and relevance inside of the US, it's a heavy lift financially.
Yeah. I'm wondering though, from when you're talking to, say, a private investor, you mentioned, let's just call it your benefactor, believes in what you're doing, wants to make sure that you're staying solvent. I appreciate that because I was going to invest in the Austin team early on and I just didn't feel comfortable doing it because I don't think they can make payroll. I don't know if this is a good investment. And I find that when we had some larger check writers coming into the Utah Warriors, I was like, oh, good. Like this team is not going to fold. Like my investment's not going to zero. So that benefactor who believes in what you're doing, that's the big guy that's coming in. But for the smaller investors who are just going to write the smaller checks, how are they supposed to get into being able to evaluate the financials? Because I find that with that, say, commercial real estate, one of the biggest issues that we have is that for your casual passive investor, they open up a pro forma and they're like, what is this? And they don't know what they're looking at. And therefore, they don't really feel qualified to invest in it. So give us some of the basic rundowns of what somebody who wants to invest in a sports like this at a much lower barrier of entry than trying to get into the NFL. What would they be looking at to evaluate this financially?
For a business such as this, it really boils down to trust on whether or not you believe in the person that's sitting across the table and asking you for the money. I know that's a significant oversimplification. There's always going to be indicators, right? It's like for sports and entertainment, it's like, okay, what is your media deal? That's the first big question that you want to ask is like, how much money are you generating? The NBA, NFL, like NFL teams are just waking up in the morning and they have $500 million that is sitting in their bank account because of the media deal
Okay.
that the NFL has for each team. And it's all distributed out to the teams. And so really the rest of it's just icing on the cake in terms of what they can do from a sponsorship, ticketing, event production perspective. But for a challenger and upstart organization like ours, it's okay. We're probably not getting media dollars, but is that media offsetting costs operationally? And then you go down the list of your other lines of revenue is then your expenses. And it ends up being a lot of the same of other businesses that I've looked at that I've run. What does your eventual EBITDA look like? And does the EBITDA end up making sense? Are there ways to be able to take a look at greater economies of scale or other efficiencies inside of the business to be able to increase revenue, but also decrease expenses, therefore increasing your EBITDA when all is said and done. So a lot of the principles are actually the same, but when you're looking at a sports and entertainment investment, you have to trust your partners in the league. And that's why I say when you're looking at an investment in the Warriors or a team or anything else, the Tamarack Fund, when I was first meeting with them, I told them up front, I said, listen, your investment in the Warriors is all you got to be as confident as the trust that you have in your investment in the other, at the time it was 10 teams, I believe, the other 10 owners within the league. And I think that carries through. You can see in the NFL, NBA that there's a very strong base of all these good, strong ownership groups, and they're able to grow according to that. But I've seen a lot of the same similarities in what it is that we're trying to do from cash flow management, budgeting, how we can try to be innovative with our sales efforts and our expense management. But the big key indicator for me is, am I getting that EBITDA number, at least for where we're at? Am I getting that closer to a cash flow neutrality long term? And if I can get that closer to a cash flow neutrality over the next 3 to 5 years, then that's the kind of the key indicator for me. And I think, you're looking at other businesses, whether they're real estate or let's just say there's a widget shop that has an EBITDA of $1 million. You know, it really comes down to what that's going to look like as you try to scale it up and manage it. And you got to really dig into some of those underlying line items of expenses, and hidden expenses in particular are the ones that every owner, every business is always going to try to sneak in a couple line items of expenses that maybe don't make a lot of sense. Let's just call it a spade. But really pulling those apart is an important part of everything.
Okay. Yeah. When you mentioned early on, like some of the financials seem like turning it on its head from other types of businesses or other types of investments. What did you mean by that?
Well, the basic premise is, let me put it in the perspective of me pitching to a prospective investor. Hey, will you give me, fill in the blank, X million dollars to invest in this business? Oh, and by the way, it doesn't make money.
Yeah.
You're going to be required to have capital calls on an annual basis in the order of magnitude of X. And it's likely going to be that, if not similar, for the next 3 to 5 years. And then 5 years after that, it might begin to tail off a little bit in terms of your overall capital call. So overall, your cash requirements for this investment of a team that's never existed and a professional sports league that's never existed, would you invest in this business?
Really what you're building and have a very long term
Yeah. So
perspective.
that's why I say it's like it flips it on its
Okay.
head, because when we were first building this, it came down to trust and whether or not you could look the other person in the eye and say, listen, I know this pro forma looks really god awful. We're going to do the best that we can. And with hard work and a passion, commitment to what it is that we're doing, we believe that we can get there. But that's sports and entertainment investment, especially an early stage one like ours. You are basically telling people, yeah, this isn't going to make any money. In fact, it's going to be at best for you a significant tax deduction, and that's about it.
Yeah, okay, so I've never said this publicly before, but what you're talking about is exactly why I wrote, I mean, a relatively small check to Rugby Utah, because when I got to Salt Lake City and I just could compare the two businesses, two teams in the same league, but compare the two businesses, I felt much better about your staying power and the professionalism and just the ability to hold things together. You were in the tough slog as well as all the teams were. And my interactions with all the other team owners and managers told me that this was nothing different. Everybody was struggling, but there was something about this particular one that I thought they just got their act together a little bit better. And I think that looking back, I made the right choice, right? Because the other team folded. But my advisor, when I told him that I wanted to do this, he just joked. He said, "You're going to have a good tax write off." That's that's exactly. I get a little carried forward loss every year. No big thing. But it's just fun to be involved. So let's switch to that tax write off thing because there are some new proposals out that sports teams owners are going to not be getting the same kind of crazy tax breaks they've been getting all these years, and that sports teams can no longer be a shield for wealth. I don't know much about the proposals. I don't know if you do, but can you speak to us about what those are and if that's going to affect your team personally, or if it's only affecting much larger organizations?
I've taken a look at it very superficially. I'm probably not the most qualified to speak on it because I think right now a lot of that is being caught up in a lot of the other.
Vague too.
Yeah, it's just been thrown out, and I think people generally just dismissed it because, candidly, the way that professional sports are going, there's different mechanisms, and let's just call them the billionaires of the world are utilizing sports as I mean, it's very smart investment tool. It's something that adds significant value to communities, but at the same time, like that Ryan Smith example, it's been very smart because what he's been able to do likely is leverage. He's not paying in cash for all of this. He's leveraging his existing stock options
Mhm.
to be able to utilize those as collateral against this loan that he has for the $1.7 billion, as well as the hockey club and everything else. But
Mhm.
there's the arbitrage there of, okay, maybe he's getting 6.5% his loan. You look at his percentage growth, IRR on that is pretty significant. So the percentage delta there, it's smart. He's losing money and having a tax write off, but at the same time, he's got an asset that's appreciating. So listen, I'm not the most qualified. I've actually asked some of our tax and legal folks just to keep an eye on it, just to see what happens there. But when the dust settles, we'll just have to see. And I'm sure there's going to be much smarter people that can help us navigate what we need to navigate there.
Yeah, it definitely made my eyebrows go up. But when I first heard the talking about NPR made a big deal out of it a year or two ago, and they're talking about all the great breaks that sports team owners get from this investment and how it's this tax thing that needs to be dealt with and greedy rich people. And I just remember sitting there listening to that radio show thinking, none of the sports team owners I know are these billionaires trying to do a negative cash flow play while they build their net worth. I'm just like, I think that this story is targeting a very small group of people. And I don't think that's really reflective of professional sports in general,
Well,
especially in team, like you said, challenger sports.
and that sometimes, as with all things these days, you have to look at source of information just to see where it's coming from.
NPR.
And listen, I think what people, again, just to use a hyper local example, just because I'm more familiar with it, but
Mhm.
Salt Lake and the state legislature just recently approved two massive kind of tax, not bonds per se, but sort of tax incentives for Smith Entertainment Group to be able to continue to develop their downtown entertainment district,
Yep.
help increase viability downtown, but also to help support the Miller Sports Entertainment Group with their opportunities around bringing Major League Baseball to Utah. And listen, all of these organizations, while yes, they're receiving potential incentives that come from additional tax dollars that come from food and beverage, hotel night stays, and everything else that really are coming from their business. You have to look at it through that lens of all of these other businesses are being supported by this sports product that is in essence an emulation of a community. That's what sports has become. Going
Mhm.
back to what I was saying earlier, so the fact that these individuals, yeah, they're being smart about their money, but I know Ryan Smith and those guys enough. They're committed to helping Utah become better and bigger. Dare I say, more respected internationally. Is so are the Miller folks. They're spending a lot of their own money in order to help do that, and being able to create that balance to help economically lift the sport and the community in general, I think is a good thing. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of that stuff gets framed as even in your guys' industry with just pure real estate.
Greedy landlords. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where they're being given incentives and other things like that. Would you have these 2,000 units of multifamily to help benefit the community had these incentives not been in play? And so you have to just look at it through that appropriate lens, I think.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of propaganda in my industry as well that sometimes I just have to say, I get it. There are some bad players, there's some bad apples in there, but most of us don't do this because we have nothing better to do. It's very risky. It's the high barrier of entry and it's very stressful. And what you mentioned before we started recording, it's stress of doing this kind of thing. And you have to ask yourself, like taking time away from your family, it takes a toll on your health. Nobody's feeling sorry for sports team owners, but at the same time, nobody's feeling sorry for greedy landlords either. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's why doesn't everybody go do it?
Yeah. It's a part of the world we live in. And that's what I think, not to get overly political here, but that's what makes America great is the capitalistic nature of what you can do. I don't believe that the sports entertainment market in the US would be as robust as it is if it wasn't for the entrepreneurial spirit of sports and of the people that have built these businesses, but then able to segue it into sports entertainment. But yeah, it's what makes America amazing, right? Is the opportunity that you have at your feet, no matter what line of work that you're in.
Yeah, and what you mentioned about traveling, I've definitely when traveling or living abroad, I'm not a patriot. I'm not even what I would call a conservative, but I'm definitely a fiscal conservative. And I feel like the opportunities that we see when we're looking at foreign investments or investing abroad, it just doesn't hold a candle to some of the entrepreneurial spirit that we have here. And I feel like every great investor needs a really great entrepreneur willing to do the hustle and do the grind on behalf of the investors. And so I'm always on the lookout for those kinds of entrepreneurs that just you can tell you don't have to do this. Nobody made you do this. I met your parents at a match one time, and when they found out that we knew you, they just glowed. They were so proud of you. And they said so many nice, kind, amazing things about you could tell that their heart and soul was in the organization as well. And I thought
Well,
that's kind of what we're talking about right here.
and that was probably after they got their loan paid back. So they
If
were
we're
probably even happier.
I don't know when they got their loan paid back, but this was before 2020 because we were actually at a match.
Yeah. But yeah, no, listen, that kind of speaks to every business, right? You couldn't do what you do without your amazing husband and your kids, and you guys couldn't do anything that you do. We can't do anything in life alone, right? It takes other people. And that's what's good and bad about business. I've joked about this in other forums, but like the good and bad about business is that you've got to deal with people.
Yeah, my least favorite thing about business.
Yeah. Right. And you can't ever do what we're trying to do now all by myself. We've got 25 amazing full-time staff members, and I couldn't be the head coach. I couldn't be the general manager. That's why I gave away the general manager responsibilities, and I'm now just overseeing the organization itself. There's smarter people that know how to do exercise science and medical treatments in support of our players. All of those things you can't just do alone. You got to have family, you got to have friends, and you got to have professional relationships to be able to help get you where you need to get to.
Yeah, sports has so many metaphors and analogies for life. We could write a whole book on the metaphor of team players and expertise and somebody overseeing the whole thing versus the technical tacticians who are down at the front line just trying to get things done. Are you going to eat a bagel today? Or are you going to eat some pork chops today? Like all of those details that come in and being able to at every level of the organization. I mean, that's just like life and business in general. But All right. So I want to ask one more thing before we wrap it up that you've mentioned several times about the synergy between other teams in the same area. I know in previous conversations, especially when the Salt Lake Real was for sale, talking about the sports community in Salt Lake City specifically, but in any community is going to be the same. How much are these other teams playing into each other as your ability to do business? Because you see, like now we have a new hockey team. Is that competition for ticket sales or does it enhance it? You talked about bringing in lacrosse and multiple sports under the same ownership structure. What does that look like, and how does it build versus compete against one another for those eyeballs?
I'm always of the perspective that anything that raises the awareness of sports in general,
Mhm.
specifically sports here in the state of Utah, is a good thing. I believe that there's always additives. Everything's good. I use the metaphor of glass half full or glass half empty. It's always going to be half full to me, but it just means that there's more opportunities to make it fuller, if that's even a way
Mhm.
to say it. But when other sports come to town, the hockey club in particular, the PLL is utilizing the same venue that we play out of. It's great because, for example, with the PLL, it gets another to 10,000 people out on a weekend that are going to that same venue. They're seeing some same signage, or they saw some videos of the Warriors playing there, or they know that the Warriors are playing there. And so for us, it adds value overall. I don't see it as intrusionary in any way, shape, or form. In fact, we've had a lot of very good collaborative conversations with most of the sports entertainment groups. The Smith Entertainment Group, they're so busy with a lot of the stuff that they're doing that there's fewer opportunities to collaborate just with the things that they've got going on. They're building a brand new hockey training facility down there at Southtown Mall, Sandy.
Yeah, I saw that.
They're the new hockey team, the team at the NBA team itself. So they've got plenty of things going on.
Okay.
The Miller Sports Entertainment Group that's coming out of the Larry H. Miller Group. They went away from sports for a little bit when they divested of the Jazz. They're still part owners in the Jazz. They still have the Bees, but now they're building a new stadium out in our neck of the woods in South Jordan. We've had some good, productive collaboration conversations with those folks. And the nice thing is that I think even the Smith Entertainment Group, the Miller Sports Entertainment Group, and even the universities locally, everyone's committed to the same ideal of giving back and impacting the community for better. So the synergies that we have there are the common understanding of what sport can do for the state of Utah, for its families, for the kids, and for the businesses that are involved. There was a Nielsen study that came out about a week ago or about a month ago that showed that partnering with sports and entertainment products is the best way to introduce yourself to one of the top two or three ways to introduce yourself to consumers.
Yeah.
It's a common understanding that we're not going to be stealing from each other. We can actually have the rising tide lift all boats. And that's the cool thing that I think is exciting about all of the different groups that are here. The Blitzer group with Real Salt Lake, they're the majority owners there. They've obviously been supportive of us, even back to DeWoy Hansen and the Wasatch group with those guys when they owned Real Salt Lake.
Mm.
Everyone's understood what sport can do and how it can help lift people and the impact that it can have on people's lives.
Yeah, it's like the community building that you were talking about. It's almost, I remember when the first stadium discussions, when every team was required to have a stadium and talking more about the community outside the stadium. It's almost like if the gold miners are going out to gold mine, then you're going to be investing in pickaxes and Levi's jeans and things like that. It's like you mentioned the restaurants, the hotels, other sports that can be playing in the same venue or concerts that can be held at the same venue. It's really a cohesive business. The Diamond District, where if you want diamonds, you go and everybody's there and they know that this is a destination for professional sports. We've had winter sports and things like that for a while, but I feel like Salt Lake is really developing into a very sports type of community. We're very outdoor minded. People just really like to be outdoors and enjoy athletics in general for all sorts of different kinds of sports, from winter sports to mountain biking to hiking to stadium and ball sports. We've only lived here, what, 6, 7 years? I've really enjoyed this culture and this atmosphere in this community of sports, honestly, that we didn't really have. It's just too hot in Texas to ever go outside.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the nice thing. I'm obviously biased, but Utah has probably the most underrated, call it sports tourism
Yeah.
cultures and communities in the world, the access. You can literally go from now with the new airport design, you can go from sitting on your airplane to sitting on a chairlift skiing in about an hour and a half.
Yep.
Literally sitting, getting off the airplane, jumping in a car, driving up, getting your ski stuff and being on a lift. It's an hour to an hour and a half. The outdoor hiking, the mountain biking, and then you got all of this stuff down in southern Utah. It's exciting. But then you pepper in all of this other stuff with the Larry H. Miller Group's grand design to get Major League Baseball here. Can you imagine what that could do for Utah on a regular basis? And you got the Olympics that are coming here in 2034. We're in the process of helping secure Rugby World Cup games here in Salt Lake for 2031 and 2033 for the men's and women's stuff. And there's other things that are going along with that. And you got the NBA that just had the All-Star game here. You've got all sorts of things that Utah really boxes above its weight when it comes to all the sports tourism type stuff. And it is a great place to live, a great business to be in. The communities here in Utah, the people, they like to get out, they like to do things, but at the same time, you're not having to pander to this individualistic type thing. It becomes like family, it becomes community, and people get behind all of that, which is really fun and really exciting to be a part of.
Yeah, I've noticed that I really love sports for business networking. One of the reasons the first year in the team, it was like, oh, I'm going to network with the other owners or the other investors, and it's going to be this great opportunity. But what I found out very quickly is I just wanted to watch the match. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about business. I am here to watch this. The most I could do was explain Rugby 101 to the people that I was sitting with. And so I've started doing my networking at Real games and jazz games. It's because then
Well,
I'm okay. I'm
right.
etching the game, but man, with rugby, I'm like, leave me alone. I even downgraded to like the most basic seat, like right there in the front, the metal benches where the party's going on because I'm there to watch that sport.
I hate to
Network.
say it, Emma, but I'm the same way. I find myself at these games, especially if it's a close game, and because I'm having to deal with sponsors and partners, and
Yes. I don't
I,
get to enjoy
I
it
hate to
anymore.
admit publicly, but every now and then I have to find myself just in a little corner, just away from everyone else, and just let me just focus on what's happening on the field because my sanity for the next week is going to be wrapped up
I
inside.
think I'll just get one of the cabanas just to support the team, but I don't want to be in there. I still go network in the cabana and I'll just go sit on the metal benches
The
and
fair
enjoy the
point.
match. So,
Fair point.
well, how do people get to a game, first of all? If you're going to be in Salt Lake City or if you live in any other cities across the country or visiting the other cities across the country, how do people get to a game?
warriorsrugby.com is the easiest way. We've got it prominently right there. Boom. You can get your tickets, whether it's an away game or a home game. You can get out to come see those games. Our first two games are March 1st and March 8th. So about a week and a half now from, I don't know when this is going to go live, but pretty soon. We've got
Yep.
our first game this weekend on Sunday
I can,
in Chicago. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be 34 degrees at kickoff. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
yeah. We've missed
Uh,
a lot of rugby from 2020 and then all the traveling. I feel like I'm going through withdrawals anyway. So if people want to catch a match, what about the league website?
It's majorleague.rugby is the website there. They can get news, updates, information. They can also download the MLR app that's on iPhone and Android.
Mhm.
It's a great app to keep up with your team or other news on the league. And then obviously you can watch all of our games locally on KJazz, but ESPN Plus is where all the games live on the OTT.
Yes. I know that was so exciting to get every time there's an upgraded media package. I'm like, this is what the sports business is built on, this media package. And then if somebody wants to get a hold of you directly, LinkedIn seems like the best place. Of where can people
I
contact
I
you?
I live on LinkedIn, and I don't have any other social media. I purposely focus on just keeping my sanity in check. So I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. So people can hit me up on LinkedIn, message me directly there, or they can just call the office. It's 801-477-7652. And our people will get me in touch.
Okay. And what kind of person should reach out to you after the show?
Listen, I think you hit on one of the things like rugby is one of the best entertainment games. Like I actually like people ask me like going back a couple years, is hockey a fun like when hockey was coming to town? Like hockey is one of the greatest in venue sports to go and watch. Rugby obviously is a little bit better just because it's rugby,
Yeah.
but It's 2 hours. It's a great networking event. It's a great opportunity to bring people to something unique and different that maybe they haven't done before. You can only go to so many jazz games and have to deal with the crowds and the amount of money that it costs to do that. So I'm a little bit biased, but I think companies and businesses that are looking for a different group night, a different hospitality opportunity, and then also just some of the premium VIP stuff that we have now, it's pretty exciting. So people should look at that because it is one of the more unique and fun experiences that you can provide your staff, family, and others that you want to have.
Agreed. When I take colleagues to rugby matches back in, especially in the early days when I didn't know any better, that I wasn't going to talk to them, they still talk about it. What was that? And it's very unique experience from the business networking standpoint. So I've really enjoyed it from that. So yes, definitely lots of opportunities there. You want a cabana, you want a box, like you want to go for those VIP experiences. Like they do a really good job of making it very personalized. And that's one thing that I really enjoyed about a little bit of a smaller sport is I feel like the personal touch is still really possible there. So appreciate you
Yeah.
coming on, Kimball, and sharing your story, sharing the business of sports and different kinds of private investments that people can get into, the pros and cons of each, and how people can make decisions if it's right for them as part of their portfolio.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I'll talk to you all soon. You can get a hold of me at partnerwithrise.com/Emma if you want to look at any of our investments that do cash flow. You got to have a variety of things in your portfolio, long-term, short-term, cash flow, tax benefits. Would love to talk to you about that as well. Until next time, can't wait to hear about your next passive income adventure.